Alright there, and here's the world on the 28th of September 2021 at about 2 p.m. A really mild but rainy day. I recorded a video around midnight last night, and I wanted to get a lot off my chest. I'd been text chatting with an old mate of mine, and I felt very pissed off and wronged by the world. Made this video about the Stockholm Syndrome in my life, and woke up this morning expecting at least a couple of comments, as I always get. And thankfully I'd left it unlisted, because you leave my videos unlisted, give them a watch through in case something was accidentally included that I didn't mean to. You have to be careful about these things, and I'd left it on its test settings, and I'm pleased about that. Any of you that I know, to the point where we have had conversations, I'm willing to share the video with you if you get in touch with me via Facebook. But yeah, the rant I had last night, I think I've honed it down a bit and levelled it off a bit, and I'm going to refer it to life at school. Anyway, watch this space. Very Freddie Mercury, wasn't it?
I've been in it. I come from it, minimum wage work and everything. And I knew I couldn't survive in it because you get, as a young adult, you start to figure out who you are. And I go, okay, I'm not an artist, but I'm an artist type. I'm nuts. You can't put me in a straight job. I can pass for normal just because I can task it. I can totally do it. Like, you can put me in a Ralph's, a Kroger's, a Starbucks. I will totally get in there and hit the work and clean it all and serve it up with a smile. But I'll be going crazy inside. Yeah, I will be punching the wall.
Everybody in those places is going.
I look back at school. Primary school was more about subconsciously absorbing the class divide. Sports person of the year has nothing to do with their attitude or their ability on the track and field. It was the local GP's son. That's just one example I'll give. There were numerous, but I've gone into them before, and I can't be bothered to justify myself each and every time I talk about this shit. The kids at my first school, my primary school, were fantastic. Across the board, across the class divide, they were all lovely. Got a lot of fond memories of that time. Secondary school, however, kid who's grown up, to give you some idea, at the age of 10, I turned 11 during the summer holidays prior to going to my secondary school. And I went there after having had the summer of playing football with my dad, occasionally having a friend over, from school days. I remember going to a last primary school birthday at a friend called Matthew's house. And, we're all playing like little boys. And, I spent most of my time with my mum or my dad, taking the dogs out for walks and being a 10-year-old who was just becoming 11. Then I was plonked into a school that was so far removed from my primary school experience that it was one of the most jarring experiences of my life. Now, I was sensitive and I had problems from the age of 5 onwards. I would be inconsolably crying at about 5 years old when I was left at school. But I got into the rhythm of it. Of course, I went through the usual rigmarole of there being some wonderful character, sensitive, brilliant, ahead of their time teachers, and some absolute prime fucking monsters. Anybody who remembers the name Mrs. Shipway. My God, we were lucky. Skin of our teeth, my class. She was just a monster, that woman. And it got to the end of the term where we were going out of a lovely teacher called Mrs. Swan's class and into Mrs. Shipway's. She retired. Ding dong, the witch is dead. She was just a monster of a woman. Anyway, I digress. I don't think I'd have got on well with Mrs. Shipway. It's funny, one of the most talented kids in the class I name him, but he was so fantastic at cartoon art. I mean, really good, really, really fucking good. Even as a 9, 10 year old, and he became disenfranchised, didn't fit in with society. He was an artistic type, but without that kind of bohemian middle class intelligence, and he just rotted and became very mentally unstable. Got into drugs as I did, and really, really, you hear about acid casualties. My God, he became a different person. He went from being an optimistic, chirpy, beautiful soul to being an aggressive, defensive, violent nutcase. I have real issues with the whole dogmatic drugs are really good for you for opening up your mind brigade. No, they're not. They're okay for some people. If you can understand that some food is okay for you, but I will be allergic to it. Some people can smoke weed, and I've seen it. They will smoke blunts, pure weed, and they're just able to go and function in the world. If I did that, I would be calling for a psychotherapist, and I would probably be in the accident and emergency unit of the local psych ward, Couldn't do it. But other people can function smoking pure weed. Amazes me. Yeah, and LSD fucked this beautiful young man up irreparably. Went to school anyway, going from playing during the summer with my mum, my dad, and a couple of friends to a place where kids from the inner city were all aware of sex, fashion, girls, boys, music. And I spent probably the first 2 months of that experience, from the moment I woke up in the morning 5 days a week, in inconsolable, like bereavement level tears, from 7:30 in the morning till about 10 in the morning, when I eventually had to admit defeat and I'm at school. I wasn't just slightly at odds with the concept of secondary school. I was broken by it. It was like an animal that has a sense of the smell of blood walking towards the abattoir. It was a sense of blind panic, and that was it dissipated slightly over the years, but I can't express to you how out of sorts I truly was. I can remember crying so much. So I was from a small village, as I say, crying so much waiting for the bus that, bus driver, lovely guy called Ken. People probably remember him, actually, if I'd asked them. Lovely bus driver we had from the East Kent Bus Company. And he got off the bus and said, "Look, are you okay?" And I had, a kid with a fight or flight defense mechanism. I said, "I just got really bad tummy ache." He said, "Look, here's 20p, go and get yourself these sweets, they'll make you feel better, and go home to your mum." And of course, my parents had it for God knows how long, with me crying before going to school. People weren't sympathetic about it in that era. I didn't get any sympathy or any understanding for how damaging school was to me. But that gives you some idea of what the first few months of secondary school were like. I eventually just got my head down, and I became, a couple of years down the line, I just thought, I don't care about this place. And I stopped bringing folders, stopped having books. I would pick a piece of paper up at the beginning of the lesson. I'd write down whatever we were forced to write down during the lesson, and then in front of the teacher, just throw it in the bin as I left. Eventually, serial truancy kicked in, and I got famed for being seen just wandering out the school whenever it suited me. And it being the 1980s, these days my parents would probably be in prison for it. But back then the school just saw me as nothing but trouble. Due to some political actions that I got involved in around the age of 15, the school took me to one side, went to the headmaster's office, and all the high brass were there from the school and said, "We know that you were in trouble with the police at the weekend. You're going to end up in prison by the time you're 18 if you don't sort your present trajectory out." Wonderful support for a kid who was always quizzical and could hold the attention of a class. Whenever we had a talk about something you're passionate about, sort of half hour in a lesson like humanities, one teacher ever said to me, "You really have got an ability to talk. It's a shame that you're never going to be in a position to ever exploit it. Never forget there was a teacher called Mr. Miller. Didn't like him very much, but I've never forgot that he identified that I did have something. He was the only teacher who ever said, just like someone would see a kid, I'm trying to big myself up, they'd see a kid and say, you can really kick a ball properly. You should go and see, some talent scouts about getting signed up as a professional football player. This teacher just said to me, after I did a talk about vivisection, animal experiments, and what I felt about them, and I spoke without a script for about 20 to 30 minutes to the whole class, and had them in the palm of my hand. Apparently, I had no recollection of it because I was so nervous, but he was the only teacher who ever said, you've got a bit of a gift there. I was just told, you're a problem, and you're not worthy of us even teaching you. And eventually they proved what was important to them. I had a mohawk. It's probably about the length this is, and it was flopped down one side of my head when I went to school. And the school just gave me the biggest gift of my life and said, that haircut is totally unsuitable. You either get your haircut or you're expelled. And I said, bye then. That's literally my reaction. But going through the years of that school, I had a few friends who were sensitive. Andy, Colin. Me and Colin had some amazing adventures in the early days of hardcore punk rock. True, like, abandon. Real living, Some of the earliest sort of formative years, experiences I had with that guy. Completely crazy, some of the shit that we were involved in. Don't regret a second of it. It's all harmless, and it wasn't all harmless actually. Could very easily have harmed ourselves, but we didn't. That's all that matters. We ganged together all of the slightly more gentle people who weren't interested, in the sense of how it was prescribed by the hardcore of the bullies and egotists in that school. We weren't interested in girls, sex, shit popular music. Even by that point, by the age of sort of 12 or 13, some of us were sharing music. Dear friend called Glenn, we were sharing music like the Smiths and the Cramps and a lot of punk, and we were kind of sharing music that we liked, and there was an underground in a really, really kind of straight school. There was an underground little tiny subculture of kids who were truly different and have proved with the advent of Facebook to have been totally different to the norm right to this day. And it's fantastic to look back on. It's not all bad news, but that culture of aggression. I can remember all the top brass of the bullies in that school. Really fucking unpleasant, horrible bullies. And there's one name that cropped up that I saw yesterday, and I thought, God, I remember that family name. All of them were really quite nasty people as kids. It says everything about their upbringing, doesn't it? And all of them joined the army and did well. I can remember somebody once saying, you get two kinds of people who join the army: people who've got a sense of purpose, or three kinds of people who've got a sense of purpose and want to make the world a better place. People who need to earn army and just haven't got any other skills whatsoever. And the third category is really unpleasant bullies and psychos who get given a gun and a license to kill sometimes. And I know of a few of them. Terrifying thinking that they got given a gun, those people, with what they used to do to kids at school. I've met bullies along the line from school who've grown into lovely people. One person, who's never a bully, one person, he's dead now, unfortunately, but he used to scare the shit out of me in primary school. But he turned into a guy who really understood the sense of, he was a fucking big bugger and double hard as well. But he used to really look, when we went from primary to secondary school, he looked after us because it wasn't an easy transition. He immediately fit in with the top brass of all the bullies and everything like that, but he was a step above them, and he made sure we were all okay. Lovely guy. Very sad that he's no longer with us, actually. But there were some horrendous people, horrendous teachers. I think all of us will recognise, all of the little group that I've got in my head now, there were a couple of hangers-on who were actually really quite unpleasant people. And even as kids, you could see what they were like, what their parents were like. That's what the truth of this is. But all of us were ladling on the Stockholm Syndrome at times to try and get through the day, and siding with our bullies at times to just get a moment's peace. There was a pecking order on the school bus as well. It usually went with age and the year you're in. You know, the people who were in the sixth form, you know, the last years of school would always have the back seat of the bus. And, you know, that was, I can remember as an 11-year-old thinking, wow, imagine getting to the point where you can sit up there. That was the throne, the back seat of the bus, and there were the two adjacent seats that faced each other. They were the kind of courtiers. They were up there, but they weren't on the back seat. And it's amazing seeing the kind of alpha, beta situation that school was kind of teaching me. That as much as I'm very much not a beta male. I think a lot of us learn to play that part. And, you know, the only language that bullies ever understand at that age is somebody who hits harder than they do. So much nonsense in this age today about listening to people, and all they want is to be understood. No, some of them thrive on it, and some of them left school and got guns, you know. But yeah, I've led a life of trying to kind of do the right things for the wrong, or doing the wrong things for the right reasons, to just give myself an easy passage through life. It's not easy, it really isn't, when you're up against bullies. I can remember even some of the really sort of subculture stuff that we were all into, the kids that I hung around with. Eventually some of it started getting popular, and the theft of that identity was pretty hard to deal with. I can remember during the grunge thing, I was 21 by that point, feeling so robbed of all of the difficulties and the commitment that you had to have to the music and the scene to ever get to go to a punk gig in a squat in Hounslow in London, you know. And all of a sudden it just became the look, the availability was instant, the look was everywhere, and it hurt a bit. You know, when you'd sort of been one of the people in 1988 who, a 3-hour connection on a coach journey in London, got searched by the police 6 times merely because of looking remotely different to the norm. Stings a bit, but yeah, I went on, and my first relationship in life was with somebody who I'd never say was, at that age, saying somebody's abusive is just ridiculous, but somebody who was quite manipulative and sort of mentally hard work, playing games and jealousy games. You know, I think a lot of kids do that, you know, don't get me wrong, but it's a reality in my life. And I was famed at that point in my life, you know, having been through not being one of the boys chasing girls and fashion and everything like that. I was still very much that kid when I got out of school at 16. You know, I felt freer. I went from oi and boy to excuse me, sir, when I went into sort of government bodies to get my dole money or something like that, which was fucking weird. I hope that schools prepare kids a little bit more for the transition between primary and then secondary to leaving. I really hope they do that, because they don't prepare you for anything. You're just scum, gutter scum, and then all of a sudden you're out in the real world, or you're really treated with sensitivity at primary school, and then you get thrown into a comprehensive that's just a nightmare. But yeah, I was known with my first ever relationship by a lot of her female friends as a really lovely guy, and I was a nice kid. And I can remember actually going with one of my first girlfriend's friends on a university interview up in York, York, Kent, a day's journey all round, a few hundred miles. And I was almost like the gay friend. I just was no threat. I was completely loyal, and that's the kind of guy I used to be. But you know, with what that relationship was like, I discovered eventually that there were, to put it really, really quite grotesquely, there were better looking people out there and people who were more fun and were going to treat me a bit better. And I started going off the rails and got into alcohol and started not giving a fuck. I think on a subconscious level, I thought I played the nice guy for years and was the nice kid. Just thought I don't give a fuck anymore. And I started lying, cheating, manipulating. So there's no excuse for anything I did, and there's no blame really for anyone else but my own. But life taught me absolutely nothing of authority, of self-possession, of personal sovereignty. And yeah, I just went hog wild during my 20s, and I found an anger around about between 24 and 26 that was just it was fury. I was furious, all of those years of placating and appeasing bullies and having in my first relationship, which was very dysfunctional. All of a sudden I found my voice, and it was due to alcohol and drugs. I personally really didn't have much of a filter anyway, got really free with what they thought and felt, and it was ugly. It really was. I'm not proud of that period of my life whatsoever. And it's amazing seeing the corruption of a child, and a really nice child. It's something which I'm very aware of now, and I still to this day with some of my behaviour during my 20s, I owe people apologies which are unconditional for a lot of the things that I said. And it's not a good feeling, but it is interesting, and I'm not apportioning blame to anyone here. But it is interesting looking back through life and thinking about how things actually transpired, and seeing that, in the world of cinema and art, we love that kind of destruction, fall, and redemption story of some Darth Vader being the classic. And I'm nowhere near in that level of romanticism, but I was a good kid, just given a hell of a lot of very jarring experiences, and ended up in some very damaging relationships with regards to my behavior as well as other people's at times. Mine a lot worse in my late 20s. It's a time in my life that I'm utterly ashamed of, and rightly so. There's a lot of people in the world who give you all this. You've got to move on and stop living in your past with regards to things like that. But sometimes you can see a integral moment in your life that was so instrumental in ruining the best life that other people around you could be potentially leading. And for a few years I didn't have much of a free rein, but I very much regret my behaviour during the late part of the 1990s. I was having a whale of a time as well at certain points, but it was just at the cost of other people far too regularly. And yeah, I'm just very interested in people who can see the redemption, the destruction, evil, and redemption arc of their own lives. I'm not suggesting I'm redeemed. I try to live every day as a responsible, decent, loving human being who lives in truth, honesty, justice, and laughter. They're aspirations, not things that I project upon myself. But it's been tough. It's been tough to do it all right initially, to the best of your ability, and end up with people manipulating your emotions and playing jealousy games with you at 16 years old. Your first taste of adult relationship is that damaging. And then all those years of sort of dealing with the bullies and finding alcohol and just thinking, right, now I can give, on a subconscious level, payback. Screaming down phone lines at family meals where we're getting a takeaway and my bit wasn't delivered. You're fucking bringing it, and you're fucking bringing it now. In front of entire rooms full of people, My then girlfriend, people letting her down at a birthday barbecue, and she told me how she felt about them never really bothering and letting her down. And I snatched the phone off her and told that all of these people she went to university with, I never had to deal with them. I told him exactly what I thought broke her confidence and made her life fucking miserable. The amount of wreckage that I was capable of creating, but I can see where it came from. As I say, no excuses. But life really does fucking throw it at you, and it can break really nice children and turn them into little monsters. As I say, I take responsibility for a lot of it, but this is just a story, a minute snapshot of just how I went down a very dark path.